What's happening, everybody? We have a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Phillies coming off of a weekend series against the Dodgers, lose 2 out of 3, but they were able to salvage the final game on Sunday afternoon with a little bit of luck and a little bit of help from Max Muncy in the 9th inning, so they do escape. They avert a sweep, Anthony, and dating back to the start, we'll try to be positive here at the start today, dating back to the start of their West Coast swing against the Seattle Mariners 13 games ago. The Phillies are 7-6 overall, but I'm guessing that most people are waking up this morning feeling a little bit underwhelmed with what they watched at Citizens Bank Park this past week against both the Padres and the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you come off of a 5-2 road trip, which we said last week when we last spoke, that seemed. Losing the last game of that road trip the way they did, it almost seemed like they went 2-5 instead of 5-2.
Yeah.
You would have expected a better week at home. There's no doubt. And look, the Padres and the Dodgers are two really good teams with two really good pitching staffs, but you can't struggle to score the way that the Phillies struggle to score. Caveat aside, Bryce Harper doesn't play 5 of those games. That changes a lot with the Phillies offense. We get it. But there's still enough concerns with other bats in that lineup to make you sit there and say, yeah, this was not good. They probably needed at least another win on this homestand to make you go, okay, you went 500 at home against these two teams. Okay, that's they're good. But yeah, I think everybody would have felt a little bit better with one more win, especially if it would have been like a solid win and not one where you needed a team like the Dodgers to kind of hand it to you on a platter.
Yeah, so I'm trying to unpack all of this. And listen, Saturday night they get out to the 4-1 lead. They have Aaron Nola on the mound. He's throwing the ball pretty well in the early innings, and then he runs into some trouble in the middle of the game. I guess it was the 5th inning, I believe, that Mookie Betts got him for the 2-run double. That started the trouble, and then he was out of the game in the 6th after giving up a solo homer. And you're like, again, it's the same thing. Like, Nola's on the mound. You got to find a way to win these games. You had the advantage in the pitching matchup on Saturday night. And you're right. I think one more win somewhere in this homestand, just splitting 3-3, you probably feel like, hey, listen, this is tough competition. Doesn't matter if you're on the road or at home. You're treading water. And that's what we talked about going back 2-3 weeks ago. This is a brutal stretch. They probably aren't going to make their move during this stretch. They just simply need to keep their heads above water. And they have more or less done that. I mean, if you step back and just kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, wait a minute. You know what? They've played the Dodgers 7 times over the last 9-10 days, and they won the season series. They beat them 4-3. They were in every single game. It was a competitive set of 7 games. In a way, you would almost have to say, wow, that's pretty good. I mean, you go back to 2014, the Phillies only have 2 series victories over the Dodgers since the 2014 season. So it's not something that you expect. The fact that they were able to kind of get the upper hand there, good, right? Like if you just evaluate it for what it is, but the way that things played out, it just felt like, man, they had to win that game last Sunday. Like even if they would have won the game last Sunday and then they went 2-4 this week, people would still be annoyed, but you'd say, like a letdown spot, that's going to happen. Bryce Harper was out of the lineup. So after yesterday's game, Joe Girardi mentioned what you just talked about. The pitching that they have faced here over the last 10 days or so has been outstanding. San Diego throws the ball extremely well. The Dodgers are obviously loaded with pitching. So you do take that into account, but at the same time, you watch them get shut out a couple times in the middle of the week. They struggle to score runs pretty much throughout the course of the weekend. Yesterday, again, the bats were pretty silent other than Garrett Stubbs and then what happened in the 9th inning there. So it's like acknowledging that there's problems that exist, but also understanding that they're in an okay spot here as they wake up this morning. It could be a lot worse, even if you want it to be a little bit better.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Bob. It's after Girardi said that, I decided to kind of take a look at it. I see. They've been facing tough pitching. Okay, he's right. But on the whole, let's just kind of look at the season. All right, let's just kind of take a look at it. I don't want to. We got into the whole strength of schedule thing last year, right? And we fell victim to it because it was like, hey, that second half of the year, they were supposed to have such an easy go of it, and then they didn't. They struggled against all those bad teams, okay?
I think everyone has PTSD from the strength of schedule, but the Eagles last year, I think, probably put some stock back into that, right?
Yeah, right, a little bit, right? But, I mean, so I looked at it, and so far this year, the teams that the Eagles, I almost said Eagles, the teams that the Phillies have played are 937 and 745 combined, if you go game by game. Nearly 200 games over 500. They have the hardest schedule so far for any team in the National League. There's a couple teams in the American League that have had tougher schedules than the Phillies, but Phillies have had the toughest schedule of any team in the National League. And if you look going ahead, according to a couple of websites, obviously just how they base it, the Phillies have the second easiest strength of schedule left in all of baseball, behind only the St. Louis Cardinals. So there will be a balancing out of this. And we talked about this. Isn't like anything new. We talked about this last time when we looked at that May schedule, or last couple times when we looked at this May schedule and how brutal it is. And the whole thing we said, Bob, is that if you get through May and you're 500, are you happy?
And we almost had a
yes, right?
And said, yeah, like absolutely, sign me up. If they're 500 at the end of this month, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I think what makes this seem a little bit more concerning is, and we've had many conversations about the Mets, and I don't really want to do that again today. Obviously, now Max Scherzer's out. They don't have DeGrom. They haven't had him all year. But they continue to win, and they continue to kind of just plow ahead. And, yes, I do think that regression's coming. But as it stands right now, I mean, they're sitting pretty in the NL East. They're 8 games ahead of the Phillies. They're going to have an opportunity this week at home to maybe extend that even further. And so it's a really weird time to be an observer of this baseball team right now because, like you talked about, the strength of schedule has been horrible. It's been brutal. They've kind of held their own. They're going to have an opportunity to make a run against the lighter portion of the schedule coming up here in a couple weeks. They're going to get a ton of games against teams like the Nationals. They should be able to take advantage of it. And oh, by the way, we're very numbers-oriented on this show, but if you look at this team and all of its parts, I'll just throw this out to you right now. We talked about the Phillies having the best OPS in baseball, I think, this time last week. Well, now they're down to number 8. A bad week of offense, 6 games in a row, generally speaking, that'll do it to you. So they're at a 722 team OPS, but it's still top 10 in the game. Mm-hmm. Flip it over to the pitching, right? You take Fangraphs WAR. They're number 6 overall in baseball right now in total WAR from the pitching staff. That combines the starting pitching and a suspect bullpen. So when you talk about a team that has graded out pretty well cumulatively from an offensive standpoint, and has done some pretty good things throwing the baseball, especially early on in games with a good starting rotation, there's still a lot to like here. Like, I look at the record, I'm totally underwhelmed by it. I acknowledge that 2021 was underwhelming, 20 was underwhelming, 19, 18 was underwhelming, and then the 5-6 years prior to that, they didn't even really try to win. So you wake up this morning and you're like, it's the same old Phillies, it's the same old shit. But I do think that if you step back and just look at this for what it is over 41 games or whatever it's been, it's kind of easy to say they're better than they've played. They're going to get hot. That streak is coming. But it's just hard because it's the Phillies. And they just don't really give you a lot of reason to believe that they're going to do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we've gotten ourselves so conditioned to believe that what we're seeing is just the same old, same old.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it's come down to. And it's, and I think about who I watch the games with the most. And I sit here and I hear the same thing over and over again from my sons and from my dad. And it's like, yeah, well, same thing. And I try to be the voice of reason. I try to suggest, but they're right. I mean, I sound like a broken record sometimes. Like, you're like, oh, you said this before. And until they change, until they prove it, then they're right. Then you're right, they're right. I mean, it's just the same feeling of mediocrity. Like, you'll get close, but you won't quite get over that hump, and it's not going to change. And so until they find a way to get on the plus side of 500, and kind of stay there, and kind of grow it from there, it's hard for me to defend it. It's hard for me to sit there and say, yeah, but they should do this, or yeah, but I mean, they're 3 games under 500, Bob. They're plus 11 in run differential. Yeah, that's another positive stat, right? Like, we talk about that all the time. Teams that are on the plus side of that run differential are usually your better teams, And right now, I think they're like 8th or whatever in baseball with that. And it doesn't feel like they are. It feels like they're 16th, 18th, something in that range.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this last week, but again, even with their recent struggles, they're 5th overall in batting average. They're 6th overall in slugging percentage as a team. And the one place that they're hurting a little bit is on-base percentage. You know, the Phillies have been a high on-base percentage team in recent years, but now they're down to number 17th overall with .310 on-base percentage. Quite frankly, they're just not walking as much as they have in recent seasons. And there are a couple different ways.
That's a problem.
There's a couple different ways that you can parse through that. Like right now, this morning, their walk rate as a team, 7.6%. That's 24th overall in baseball. So when we talk about them having a slightly below average on base percentage as a team collectively, that's actually driven by the fact that they've been very successful in putting balls in play and getting on base that way. I mean, their walk rate has been dismal, and that really showed up this week. I mean, they went through stretches where I believe coming into yesterday's game, they had walked like 5 times, or coming into Saturday night's game, they had walked 5 times in 4 games on this homestand. So the thing that's interesting about it, though, and we've talked, and I think we might have talked about this on our last episode, is that sometimes you want to be a little bit more aggressive. You'd almost be willing to forego the walk rate if it means doing damage, being more aggressive early in counts, and really being able to generate runs that way. But they haven't been able to consistently do it. So you say, okay, I want you to be aggressive and I want you to hunt early in the count, but I also need you to be a little bit better at working counts and finding alternative ways to reach base. The team has really struggled to do that so far this season.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think Girardi talked about it before the game, either yesterday or before the game Saturday. I forget which day it was. About how bad they are at swinging at pitches out of the zone, swings and misses on pitches out of the zone.
Yeah.
I think that they're worse in the National League, and like 28th in baseball or something like that. And that's something that is,
I can actually just verify that. I can bring that up for you. I mean, yeah. So looking at this, they're actually as of this morning, they're outside the swing, or they're outside the zone swing percentage is 34%, which is actually 8th, the 8th worst or 8th highest, I guess I should say, in baseball.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, that was the thing that he expressed concern with, and I think it's those kinds of pitches, which is where, if you really want to get into the fine line of what you're saying, be more aggressive but be more patient at the same time.
Just want to have it both ways, really.
Right. How do you do that? And it's simply, if you got to identify, pitch selection. It's really where it comes down to it. Yes, be more aggressive on pitches in the zone, but cut down on swings and misses at pitches that are not in the zone. And I think that might get your on-base percentage up a little bit. You walk a little bit more, and maybe that helps. And maybe that's where the difference is, Bob. Another thought is that you look at all this. The offense is good, the pitching is good. A lot of times those pitching WAR and pitching. Obviously their ERA. The pitching WAR, a lot of it's based on fielding and independent pitching, right? A lot of times WAR is based on FIP, right? Okay, and then you look at ERA. ERA is only looking at earned runs. Not to say the Phillies are making a lot of errors defensively, because they're not. I mean, the number of errors is actually lower than I thought it would be, but maybe they're not as good defensively. I mean, they're still not good defensively, and that's also part of the problem.
It's definitely part
so.
of
I think when you break the two down, you look at the offensive problem is not getting on base enough. The defensive problem is just not being able to cover enough ground, and that's where and somewhere in there is the reason why the two aren't meshing for more wins.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're also seeing, if you dive deeper into like the StatCast numbers and the Baseball Savant numbers, Phillies pitchers, especially starting pitchers, are allowing some of the softest contact in all of baseball, which has probably actually helped out this defense a little bit. I mean, they've done a really nice job in terms of exiting hard hit percentage, exit velocity, limiting hard hit percentage. They've been really good there. Phillies hitters, conversely, have actually hit the ball pretty hard, pretty frequently. And then the overall takeaway here is that the production isn't actually quite matching the way that they're actually hitting the baseball, which I don't want to go too far down that road, because while I look at those numbers and I do find that they're interesting if you can provide context to them, at the end of the day, I kind of am more results-oriented. I'm more, all right, how many runs per game are you scoring? How consistent is your offense? And so while I like to look at those metrics, look at that data, I think the bottom line is that this is still an offense that roughly a quarter of the time is scoring 2 runs or fewer, and that's really at the heart of what the problem is that ails the Phillies here. So, like you said, you wake up this morning, you're sitting 3 games under 500. You're starting to see a pretty sizable gap here in the division. Certainly the wild card's a different story, and I think that you and I both, sitting here in March, talked about really the Phillies' path to the postseason, probably going through the expanded playoffs with the additional wild card. I mean, I think that that's really what we're looking at. And so, I think if nothing else, the schedule being what it's been, they haven't taken themselves out of that conversation, or they haven't fallen so far off the pace there that you have to slam the panic button in that regard. Now, that being said, we're talking about team-wide statistics, team-wide output. You start to dig a little bit deeper into some of the offensive numbers, some of the performances of individual players, and I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't a little bit concerned at this point with certain players. And we did not,
a little bit.
For the listeners here, we did not talk about what we were going to go through before. We didn't have a production meeting, so we're kind of just rolling with this. And at the top of the list, and I've been patient in bringing him up. In fact, I don't know that we've really talked about this player at all on this show this season. But I do think this morning it's probably time that we bring JT Realmuto into the conversation. And there's quite a few things happening here. And, you look at the season statistics. He's hitting .224. He has a .614 OPS. His on-base percentage is under 300. He's slugging .321. I mean, these are just simply numbers that you would not expect from him. And the numbers, I think, are even actually driven down by what we've seen more recently. I mean, in the month of May, in 16 games, JT Realmuto's hitting .169. I mean, he's been dreadful. So I guess the question is, what are you seeing out of him? And, a quarter of the way into the season, are you concerned by what you're seeing from him?
I'm not seeing anything out of him, Bob. I see a guy that is tinkering a lot with his swing, can't really find what's going on. He's very frustrated. Look, I mean, for a guy who has always been, here's where you know that the game's getting to him. I think a little bit mentally is, for a guy who has always been considered an excellent base runner for a catcher, to have the kind of boneheaded mistake he had that almost cost him the game yesterday in the 10th inning, it's like, even that, it's like, man, that is so not Realmuto.
Right.
Like, I mean, that's an no-double play, right?
And so to hit the reset button on that sequence, here are the Phillies in extra innings. Realmuto leaves a couple runners on in the 9th with a chance to win the game. Doesn't get it done. He starts the extra inning as the ghost runner out at second base. Garrett Stubbs hits a ground ball to shortstop. He beats it out. Realmuto, good base running play, advances to third. A good base running play, at least initially, advances to third, slides in safely, and then he gets deked out, makes a move towards home, and then is tug out going back into the third base bag for the first out of the inning. And what looked to be a killer, a play, a boneheaded play that was going to lose them the game, or certainly appeared that it was going to lose them the game. And interestingly enough, I saw some people try to put it on third base coach Dusty Wathan. If you go back and actually look at the replay of that, he's all over it. I mean, he's pointing right away like back. It's not like, I mean, he was right on top of it. So that mistake solely falls at the feet of JT Realmuto. And to your point, I agree. It's a play made by a guy trying to do too much, trying to overcompensate for his struggles elsewhere. I mean, that is absolutely what we saw in the 10th inning of yesterday's game. And fortunately for him and the rest of the Phillies, he was bailed out by Roman Quinn, Garrett Stubbs of all people. So it's interesting. And so we talk about advanced metrics and data and looking at StatCast numbers. Okay, so like if you pull up JT Realmuto's numbers right now, and I tell you that he's hitting well under 200 this month, on-base percentage is terrible, he's not driving the baseball. Where I really get concerned, I talked about contextualizing these numbers. If you go into his deeper numbers, okay, and you look at the way that he has hit the baseball this year, you look at how he stacks up to what's happening across the league, I mean, it's been bad. It's been concerning. And so, let me just give you a couple quick numbers here. In terms of average exit velocity, he's in the 13th percentile right now across baseball, 40-plus games into this season. Barrel percentage, just how often are you squaring up the baseball? The 17th percentile. K rate, 31st percentile. Hard hit percentage, 26. Expected slugging, where you're actually looking at the result of what should be happening based on how he's hitting the baseball, 20th percentile. And oh, by the way, we talk about how he's this complete catcher. We've seen some lapses in key spots. Sir Anthony Dominguez on Saturday night, him and Real Muto had a couple different issues, led to some problems in that game. His framing percentage, I mean, this stuff's graded out with advanced data, 40th percentile. I mean, he's been bad. He's been average at best defensively, and he's been woeful offensively. Now, the only thing I will say in his defense is if you look at the numbers of catchers around the league, they're not great. And so in that way, he's not that far off the mark. But for a 9-figure player, a guy that is supposed to be a difference maker, he's not been that.
Yeah, and there's no argument. I mean, he's been a major disappointment this season, and I think that part of the problem has been, well, a pretty confident part of the problem has been the fact that they haven't been able to rest him, Bob. I think, coming into the season, we knew that the whole plan, the DH plan, was we're going to rotate this DH. We're going to get Schwarber and Castellanos most of the time DHing, but every once in a while we'll rest Bryce or rest Hoskins and rest Real Muto, get him off his feet, and be able to still keep his bat in the lineup and blah 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 blah, all this stuff. And of course Harper's injury has made it to the point where you have to keep Harper in the lineup, and the only way to keep him in is he's got to be pretty much a full-time DH. They've still not rested Real Muto. And that's to me the one thing. I think that, when you're getting to get at the age that he's at, and you play as many games as you do behind the plate, it's just going to catch up to you eventually, right? I mean, I don't know how many catchers in the history of baseball are playing, getting over 500 at bats in their 30s and catching all that time.
Right.
Not many. I mean, they're a handful. And still being productive for that matter. So I think that that's part of it. I think that he's a guy that's going to need a little bit more time on the bench, and that's not to say to put him on the bench because he's struggling. I mean, of course, you could look at it from that perspective and say, hey, give JT a couple of days, let him kind of clear his head, whatever. That's fine. I'm cool with that from a perspective of trying to get him back on track. But if he does get back on track, I still can't fathom putting him in there and playing him as much as he's been playing. He played the entire Dodgers series last week in L.A. I mean, you can't. It's 4 games in a row, against a really good team, including a day game after a night game. He's playing 6 out of 7. He needs a little bit of time off, and I think that's the Phillies, because of the start they got off to, are so worried about resting him because it hurts the lineup, especially obviously with Harper when he was out. They didn't want to take him out of the lineup. I think that it's a thing where Real Muto has a better chance of getting back to being the player that he was and the player you expect him to be if you let him play more of a normal catcher schedule and not count on him for so much. And finally, with the way that Stubbs has shown that he can play when he fills in, not to say he needs to play more with more regularity, but it's almost like in years past, it's like, oh, you got to throw out Andrew Knapp out there.
Right.
Well, that's a guaranteed out every time he comes up. This kid actually, he's a gamer, man. And there's a lot to like about the way he approaches it. So you almost feel like you can at least get something out of your backup catcher when Real Muto is down. You feel a little bit more confident about it. I think it's something that Girardi really has to consider moving forward here, at least over the next couple of months.
Well, it's an interesting day to have this conversation because obviously Garrett Stubbs was very good in yesterday's game. He homered, and then, like we said, he was in the middle of kind of everything there in the 10th inning, some good base running, did a nice job. listen, he's played 10 games this season. He's had 29 plate appearances. He's hitting 400. His OPS is 1144. I would not expect him to maintain those numbers, but I do think, if nothing else, he's shown that he gives you a viable chance as a backup catcher. And I do wonder if they may consider resting Realmuto a little bit more frequently here as we move into this, we'll say, second quarter of the season, to try to let him get some footing. Whether it's fatigue, whether it's overusage, whether it's him pressing, or whether he's just lost a step, there's obviously a lot of things happening right now, none of which are good for this player. And I do kind of want to just give a little bit more context. Obviously, there's only a handful of catchers that qualify for batting titles and when you take a look at the major offensive statistics. But I just tried to run this a different way. So, of current catchers this season that have had at least 20 plate appearances, and again, Stubbs has 29, so that's kind of why I picked this out. JT Realmuto is 14th overall right now in WAR, 0.6. When you look at slugging percentage, I mean, you've got to go down to the second page. I mean, like, I'm just scrolling through this. Here you go. JT Realmuto right now, amongst all catchers with at least 20 plate appearances this season, is 37th in slugging percentage at 321. I mean, that's just not what you would expect. A guy like Yadier Molina at this point is ahead of him. Guys like Joey Bart, Alejandro Kirk, Las Diaz, these are guys that you just would not expect to be ahead of him in this regard. And so it's not good. The Phillies certainly need him to be better. And I think one of my takeaways about this team in general is that they are paying a handful of guys very handsomely, and they're not doing enough, whether that be JT Realmuto, whether it be Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, and, to a lesser extent, Rhys Hoskins, who, again, has just been so up and down here. They need more production from the guys that they're paying to be productive.
Well, yeah. I mean, and we looked at, you look at this past week and you say, where are some of the struggles? We've not said anything about Castellanos either. I mean, he was mired in a bit of a slump there. Obviously kind of went under the radar a little bit because he had been off to such a good start and he was so productive. But he went through a stretch before yesterday's game of going like 5 for 41.
Yeah.
I mean, that was, again, there's a guy you're paying big money to be productive, and you go 5 for 41. That's not productive at all.
Yeah, I mean, he's hitting 225 this month.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday he comes through, obviously, big double in the ninth inning, 2-out double, and then scores on the hit by Seeger to tie the game and force extra innings. That's a clutch hit right there by Castellanos. He had 2 hits yesterday, so maybe he starts to turn it back around again. But his batting average had fallen down into the 250s. I think he's back up to like 262 now or whatever it is. But yeah, so there's a guy that you expect to be about 20 points higher than what he is right now. So he's another guy that you kind of throw into that mix a little bit.
I agree, and I think that part of the reason that he's not catching as much heat is because there's still a lack of familiarity with the player. He's still somewhat new. We haven't been through the fatigue of Nick Castellanos like we have been with some of the other players that we're talking about here. I think that also you look at Kyle Schwarber, and he's hitting just a hair over 200 this morning, all the strikeouts, inability to really kind of get on base. Obviously, the power numbers have been really good, and that's the reason the OPS is as good as it is, but I just think that there's so many other guys right now that you kind of look at and you kind of direct your impatience at. And one thing that I find interesting, too, and I really don't want to have this conversation this morning, but I saw on Saturday night especially, a lot of people were like, the Phillies lost Saturday night's game because of Odubel Herrera. He's got to go. He's everything that's wrong with the team. And, I really don't want to have this conversation. I think we've spent probably too much time talking about Odubel Herrera so far on the show. But again, it kind of goes back to a point that I made, and I think that you kind of piggybacked on a week or two ago, which is, Odubel Herrera is not a smart baseball player, and we get usually 1 to 3 different, examples of that every week. But when you look at what certain guys on this team are being paid and what they're doing in terms of production, getting aggravated with a guy that's making less than $2 million this season and basically telling people that he's the reason why they're not winning, I think is kind of just, it's a convenient target.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is Philadelphia, Bob, right? We have our targets and blame them for the same thing every time, whether it's their fault or not. In every sport, there is somebody who the fans don't like, either on the field or off, whether it's a player or a coach or whoever, and they blame that particular person for absolutely everything that's wrong, even when they have nothing to do with it. That's just the nature of this city. So yeah, I mean, I does it annoy me sometimes? Sure, but I brush it off. I brush it off as just ignorance, in all honesty.
So now, moving to the other side of things, and just talking about this pitching staff a little bit. Ranger Suarez obviously struggled a little bit this weekend on Friday night, and Aaron Nola had a vintage Aaron Nola start where the results weren't quite as good as the way that he performed, right? And we have not had that conversation about Aaron Nola in months, and it's kind of been refreshing. He went through the rotation 6-7 different times and looked really good, and the results were good. And so it was just kind of refreshing to not have to dissect every little thing of Aaron Nola's performance, but he did kind of run into some trouble on Saturday night. I don't know where you're at right now. I still am not concerned about Ranger Suarez. I think overall, from a more general, higher-level perspective, I think he's been pretty good. Obviously, he's not been as good this season as he was a year ago, but I still like the upside there. I still feel pretty comfortable on a start-to-start basis that he's going to turn in a good effort. Same thing with Aaron Nola. Mildly agitating effort the other night, but nothing where I would say, see, this is what he is. I think it was one okay, mediocre start that was on the heels of 6 or 7 really good ones. Zach Wheeler certainly appears to be all the way back. And now Zach Eflin, who we talked about, said it was interesting that they were going to open up the homestand with Zach Eflin, given that he had basically a 2+ week layoff. He wasn't very good in his first start or his last start before going on the COVID-related IL against the Mets on Sunday Night Baseball. And all he does this week is go 13 combined innings against the Padres and Dodgers, allow just 9 hits, 2 walks, strikes out a total of 17, 12 of which came during yesterday's performance against the Dodgers. He was awesome on 2 separate occasions this past week, and if he can give them that, this is where I kind of get a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more bullish on this team. I don't want to repeat the thesis here, but if you're going to get this type of starting pitching and you have this offense, which has still been fairly productive despite its inconsistencies, that's loaded with players that have a good track record, it's like you're just waiting. You're just waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, you are, and that's. Maybe it never does, and this ends up being fool's gold, and we just sit here and go back at the end of the season when we're having the post-mortem and be like, what the hell, man? We should have seen this coming. It wasn't as good as we thought it was going to be, and here's why: because it's something we're missing right now. Who knows? But you're right. I mean, that's why I stay with it. That's why I stick with it. That's why I try to preach patience with the team. These portions of seasons happen in over the course of 162 games. It just so happens that the Phillies are having it right off the jump in April and May, and you're just waiting for that run to happen. Like last year, their run happened in July, right? I mean, that was when their run happened.
It happened in August. The calendar turned to August, and it was August 1st. And I only know this because I looked it up the other day. It was August 1st. They start the month with 8 consecutive wins. But the problem with that was that they followed it in their next 9 games with 7 losses. And so you couldn't even really appreciate that run for what it was.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. So it happened late in the year. We're waiting for it. I don't anticipate it happening this week. I mean, you got another 7 tough games.
Yeah, and I want to get into that
in your division.
I
don't anticipate it happening this week. But if they could if you tread water, if you play 500 ball this week, next week when we talk about this, we shouldn't be disappointed. We should be okay. All right. They had a decent week against Atlanta and the Mets. Would we have liked it to be better? Sure, but you're hanging in there. And then you got the Giants coming. After that, that's when you want to see it happen. And if 3 weeks from now, Bob, we're still sitting here and the team's still hanging right around 500, still treading water, playing mediocre baseball against mediocre teams, then I think that there's let's have the alarm bells.
Yeah.
Let's start ringing the bells. But as long as they're playing these good teams and just hanging in, I mean, like I look at the 7 games against the Dodgers. Let's just look at those 7 just real quick. They were in every game.
They were.
Every game they're in, and they go 4-3. So, going 4-3 is great. Okay, against that team is a really good outcome. You could make an argument that they could have won 6.
I hear you. I would make an argument that the way that they played in those games, that they probably should have won 5. I would say that yesterday's game they didn't have any business winning. Saturday night game they should have won. And then Friday night, probably not. And then last Sunday, they probably should have. So,
right. My argument was going to be they could have won as many as 6, but they also could have lost as many as 6.
Yes,
because they got lucky in a couple games early in the series out in LA. So, but the point was that you played arguably the best team in the National League. Okay, about as well as you could play them for 7 games. And made, if that was a playoff series, I mean, that would have been a hell of a playoff series. In all honesty, if you put those 7 games together the way that they went, that would have been something else. So I look at that and I think there's reason for optimism because of things like that. I mean, yes, are there frustrations when you get no hit by the Mets or you get shut out by Mike Clevenger, who has not pitched great, although he's he does have a track record in the past. But I mean, you get shut down by him. You get frustrated by those games. Yes, of course you do. And there's too many of them.
Actually, if we would have recorded this in the middle of the week, I would have gone on a Mike Clevenger, Joe Girardi rant. Can we, here on out, can we just do ourselves a favor? And I almost want to tell Joe this just from hey, do yourself a favor, and after a bad offensive performance, can you please stop telling people, well, we've never seen him before? It's possible to have never seen a pitcher and hit the pitcher.
Yeah.
It's we need to see him at least 3 or 4 times before we really get a feel for him. I don't want to hear that.
No, you're right.
I'm with you, and I think the way that I feel, if I can sum this up this morning, is that although the ebb and flow of the results feel a lot like they have the last few seasons, and thus it feels like we're just watching the same old Phillies, the eye test, when I watch this team and I dig into these numbers the way that I do, it tells me that this team is better. It's a different team. Like last year when we would have these conversations, it would always end with me saying, I don't think this team's very good. I don't think they're going to win. But, hey, maybe they'll get hot and maybe they can add at the trade deadline and make it better. I feel like that's sort of been my vibe pretty much all along since we've been doing this show. It's kind of like they're spending a lot of money. I want them to be good, but I just don't believe what I'm seeing here. I have no faith in it. Well, now I kind of look at this and go, the results haven't been there, but I feel like this team is better. I feel like a run is going to come, and I never feel like that. So, that's where I'm at this morning. I'm not telling you that you should go, clear your calendar for the first few weeks of October. I'm not telling you that you should bet a futures market on the Phillies to win the NL East right now. But I just feel like they are going to get hot, and they're going to at some point. Here you go, bold take of the day. At some point, I don't know if they finish the season here, they will be in playoff position, where if the season ends today, the Phillies will be one of the teams representing the National League. So they are going to make up that ground. I believe that.
And I think you're correct. I'm right there with you, Bob. I believe in what we're seeing. Yeah, there's inconsistency. Yeah, there's people to be concerned about. But I think you can look at any team and find the same things. Like you can look at any team and be concerned about certain aspects of that team, right? I mean, that's just the nature of baseball. There's so much to look at, so much to digest, so much to break down, and then there's so many more games, right? So it's easy to do that stuff. So I think when you really want to look at it and take that more of 1,000-foot view, look at it from far away, and what do you just based on what you see and not be so engrossed in it like we are game in, game out. Yes, this is still a playoff team in my mind. This is still a playoff team, and I have a little bit of confidence in them this week. I know you wanted to talk about this week's schedule.
Yeah, actually, a perfect segue. It kind of rolls right into where I wanted to go here. And so,
and I think that there's, we'll let you start it off, but the way that they played in Seattle and LA gives me more confidence finally about them on the road against playing Atlanta and the Mets this week. So go ahead.
All right, so the Phillies go to Atlanta for the start of a 4-game series, all night games, by the way. These next 7 games that the Phillies play, if you're a daytime baseball fan, you're going to be very disappointed because they also we play the national game on Sunday night again. So I feel like that the Phillies this year are like the NFL or MLB equivalent of the Baltimore Ravens. Like every time you turn on like an ESPN or a primetime game, you're like, here's the Phillies again. And the rest of the country is like, I don't really need to see this team. So here's the Phillies. They open up with the Braves tonight, 7:20 first pitch at Truist Park, and you have Zach Wheeler on the mound going against lefty Tucker Davidson. And listen, I'm not going to pretend to know a ton about Tucker Davidson. I know that you tend to be a little bit more plugged in with what's going on outside of Philadelphia. I will tell you this. The Phillies need to at least split this series with the Braves. Both teams come in at 19 and 22. I think both teams actually come into this series pretty much in the same spot, which is we've sort of screwed around for the first 40 games here. We haven't done what we had hoped to do. This is the week that we turn it around. This is the week where we have to find another gear. And so you're not catching one team ultra motivated and another team that's kind of just going through the slog of the schedule. I think both of these teams are coming into this series going like, now's the time. Like, let's bleep and go, so to speak. And so you get Wheeler-Davidson tonight, and if the Phillies are going to split or at least split this series, they better win tonight with Zach Wheeler on the mound.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, and look, Tucker Davidson, I know he's not like a big-time prospect for them. I mean, he was one of those later round draft picks who's just kind of made his way and kind of hung around in the minor leagues. I think he may have made his debut against the Phillies, or I remember one of his first major league starts was against the Phillies during the COVID year, the 60-game season. He's nothing special. He's just not. And you have Wheeler on the mound who is special. And so yes, tonight is a game that you got to look at it and go, this is one. If you're going to win the week, if you're going to go 4-3 this week against these two teams, this is one of the 4. There's no doubt about it. And if you lose this one, you've put yourself in a bad spot to start the week. Yeah, I agree with you. This is almost a must-win tonight. He's
a 26-year-old who has pitched very little. I mean, he pitched in one game against, perhaps it was the Phillies in 2020. He appeared in 4 games for the Braves last year, 20 innings pitched. And then so far this season, he's appeared in 2 games, has a 5.87 ERA. If you believe Pipeline, he's their 7th best prospect overall. But I don't know. I mean, he's 26 years old, and he's got less than 10 games to his credit, so I don't know what kind of prospect that makes you. That almost makes you a Phillies prospect. That's 26 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I agree. I fully agree with you. They need to go out there and win Game 1 of this series tonight, and then you'll have Kyle Gibson, Max Fried in Game 2, Ranger Suarez, and Charlie Morton in Game 3. Suarez obviously been a little bit inconsistent, but as has Charlie Morton. At some point you wonder, does age and Father Time just catch up to Charlie Morton? Talking about a guy who is what right now? I think he's 38 years old. So, I mean, he's been okay. He hasn't been a disaster, but he's not been that Charlie Morton that you kind of look at and say, uh-oh, we're in for it tonight. So I believe that things will then wrap up. It'll be Aaron Nola, though the Phillies have not yet made that official. And he'll go in the finale. I don't know if the Braves have listed a starter yet. Kyle Wright, who's been pretty good for them. He's probably been their best pitcher so far this season. So
a little bit of a stunner there too.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's
that he's been so good.
Certainly shapes up to be quite an interesting series, and then that takes you to New York again for 3 games against the Mets. And so I guess I think that this is kind of a cop-out, but I would say if they come back Memorial Day, Citizens Bank Park off a 4-3 road trip here, you'd feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we got the pitching matchups to be determined with the Mets, but we know that their starting rotation's a mess right now.
Well, one thing I do like, too, is that finally, you're going to get Wheeler 2 times on this road trip. Wheeler will see the Mets. You know, whereas
Yes.
it feels like every time you show up, and I know it won't happen this weekend, but every time you show up, there's DeGrom, there's Scherzer. You know, you feel like the Phillies have faced Scherzer 27 times since the start of last season.
Well, they faced him 3 times already this year.
So it'll be nice
Right?
to Wheeler
So-
kind of get the ball here against them, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do. I think that, you know, I think if it lines up correctly, Wheeler will face Peterson for the Mets on Saturday. Is what I think. If the rotation sticks as it's supposed to be, I think that's the matchup.
Now, the only thing I will say though is we talk about the Phillies and the Braves being in a similar spot. They're both kind of underachievers, at least relative to expectations. The Phillies, you know, we say 4-3 this week, but if that's, I don't know, a split against the Braves and 2 out of 3 in New York, or 3 out of 4 against the Braves and they lose 2 out of 3 in New York. I mean, the fact of the matter is both of these teams are 8 games behind the Mets, and so is anything short of a sweep up in New York really? I know that's a huge ask for a team that doesn't play well on the road to begin with, but some people are probably going to look at this and say, you don't see the Mets again for quite some time. Like, you better go right now. You have not played well against this team. Like, you've got to go up there and make the big statement. You've got to start cutting down the ground here a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, you know, you want to sweep the Mets, right? There's no doubt about it. I mean, you got to look at this series this weekend as something that's huge, and that's another thing, Bob, makes me wonder. The reason that why haven't the Phillies announced a starter for that final game against the Braves? Do you almost feel like that they want to maybe give Nola the extra day and have him pitch against the Mets?
I don't know. Maybe you say, you know what, we're going to come after you with Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler in that series and see what's what. I mean,
yeah,
I would probably be. I would not be surprised, I suppose. At the same time, like, are you really in a spot where you're going to punt against the Braves, the team that, by the way, won the World Series last year, which, by the way, got off to a slow start and then took a rocket ship into October? Like, I don't know if that's the team that I would want to punt against, but yeah, I mean, I guess you could make an argument for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you're necessarily saying you're going to punt. More so is that, you know, maybe you say we'll go a bullpen game, or we'll you know we'll recall that Bailey Falter and have him give it another go, or kind of thing. I don't know. I just think that it's something that you might consider if you really look at that. If you really believe that Mets series is that important,
right?
Because of how far behind you are right now, or if you look at it and say, there's still plenty of time, no problem. We'll go with we'll skip Nola this time around against the Mets. Then you look at it and say 2 out of 3 is good. And, you know, and that's kind of where I'm at. I'm looking at it as split with the Braves, win 2 out of 3 against the Mets, and you're okay.
So let me ask,
and I'm okay with that.
Let me ask you this: the Phillies, go on the road this week, and they go 2-5 on this trip.
Oh, God.
So what does that look like? That's I don't know. 3 out of 4 you lose in Atlanta, and then you lose 2 out of 3 in New York. And so it's 2 more series losses. And you come back home on Memorial Day, and you're 21-27, and you're probably 10-plus games out of the NL East. Do you make a managerial change at that point?
Certainly not that day. You got the Giants coming in with Kapler. They would never do it.
That's why I asked.
They would never do it.
Wouldn't that be something, man? Wouldn't that be something?
Never do it, Bob.
Monday morning, the press release comes out. Gabe's talking about mustaches versus beards. He's talking about how it's good to be back, breathing in the city air, you know, and he learned a lot here in Philadelphia, and Joe Girardi gets the Twitter account Fransky in L.A. It's the Wawa bag. You give him the Wawa bag. There was a poll this morning on that Twitter account. It was one of the options was like, do you give Joe Girardi the Wawa bag like Charlie Manuel back in the day? So I don't know, but I will tell you this. I was getting ready to, and I wrote this in the little 500-word recap I ended up putting up on the site this morning. I had 746 words well prepped in the 9th inning of yesterday's game about how, yes, we have arrived at the point where it's time to say goodbye to the manager. And they won the game, and so I felt that the timing, this is like a reader exclusive, this part of the show. I said, well, this is obviously not the time for this, so we won't do it. But I will put it on ice, and I bet you I may need it again at some point. So I just wonder, for me, if they were to go out and just have a train wreck of a road trip here, you're 48 games into the season at that point, I guess you are. Yeah, 48 games into the season. You've played the bulk of your games against the Mets, the team that you're trailing. At what point, maybe from the optics standpoint, having Gabe Kapler in town isn't the day to do it, but is it time to conceptually start thinking about actually doing something here?
I mean, you have to. I think it starts to become part of the conversation for real.
Like whether or not you think it's his fault, like we don't even need to have that conversation.
I'm with you there, Bob. I mean, I think it becomes part of the conversation at that point. I'm not certain that they completely panic just yet. Again, I think that I think that the Phillies look at their own schedule, and they see where the relief is coming.
Right.
And to be honest with you, it's certainly not right after the Giants because you have the Angels and the Brewers, but then it's right after that. Like that's when they see that their schedule starts to become something that they can manage. Compile some wins. When you go Arizona, Miami, Washington, Texas, a stretch of games, there was a 3, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13 games against bad. Well, the Marlins aren't bad, but teams that are more manageable teams, you should get wins against. I think in all honesty, that's your Waterloo. In all honesty, if you can't come out of that stretch of games and having done well and gotten yourself back into conversation, I think that's when it would happen.
Yeah, and it's a shame that we're here middle of May, trending towards the end of May, and we're still having this conversation. We would have hoped that the Phillies would be over this at this point. And I think that you and I can look at this and understand that not everything that goes wrong is Joe Girardi's fault. It's not his fault that they, got shut out twice this week. It's not. But at some point, it reaches a juncture where you have to at least consider doing something. And so,
well, I mean, and I'm of the mindset
checking in on.
And I said it last week, Bob, and I'll say it again. And I think yesterday is a great example when you see the kind of frustration that had set in for Rhys Hoskins when he absolutely destroyed that trash can in the dugout. Like, to me, that's the you want to wake up the locker room, the clubhouse. You make a trade first, and you trade somebody who everybody likes, who's who's considered part of the core of the team, and won't hurt you to move on from him because you have the flexibility to move other people around. Actually, might really help the lineup in some way.
We should start sponsoring this part of the podcast.
It's what it is.
Trade Rhys Hoskins is part of the podcast.
The trade Reed. This is the trade Rhys Hoskins.
Brought to you by Realmuto Honda.
Yeah, but no, seriously. I mean, I would rather address the. I don't like teams that feel like they get off the hook when a manager or a coach is fired and let go. And it's almost like, well, see, it was their fault, not ours.
Right.
I'd rather you. And I don't know why teams don't do it more often, but you should make the change on your roster first. If that doesn't work, then okay, then go. Then nice. Okay, great. We tried the roster thing. That didn't work. Maybe we need to change the voice, and then you go to and change the manager and the coach.
Yeah.
But teams automatically they look at it and go, well, we can't trade 25 players, so let's get rid of the coach. It's just too quick of a. It's a narrow viewpoint in my mind, in sports in general, and I think it happens far too often. I think it happens in the NFL. I think it happens a lot. You just get a coach lasts 1 or 2 years. Like, really? I mean, you put that team together and you ask him to win in 1 year and he doesn't. And, all right, he's gone. Come on, that sucks. So I think it happens too much. I'd like to see something, even if it's not Rhys Hoskins. I'd like to see something from within the team first to try and wake them up.
Fair enough. All right, well, that's something to monitor, and we'll certainly talk again next not even next week. We'll do it again later this week, hopefully either as they wrap up the Braves series, and I know you got one more thing, and I'll let you get there.
No. Here's the thing. Let me just say this. I take responsibility this week, Bob. Usually I'm blaming you.
Okay.
But I take responsibility this week for us not having a second episode last week.
just got to do a better job. That's all.
No, it was my fault. My schedule was really, really nutso last Thursday and Friday. So much so that I actually ghosted Russ on Friday. Like he was texting me like an ex-girlfriend. I mean, it was like nonstop. Like how much
it wasn't just one long text. It was like a lot of like
a lot of like four
messages.
Like 4 words. Where are you? Why aren't you answering me? Hello, like those kinds of texts.
Well, I was also very busy on Friday, and I was kind of like in a spot where I said, if he texts me and asks to do the show, I'll make it work. But I'm not going to be the initiator here, and didn't, and it is what it is. So we'll be back with 2 though this week.
This week we'll do 2 this week for sure.
Do you have one more thing before we roll out of here?
Yeah, I do, and I debated on what the one last thing would be, and I decided to stay away from the real controversial stuff that's going on because I think I don't like ending on serious notes, and the thing going on between like the Yankees and the White Sox. If we can, if we could talk about it, if at some point maybe
I'd like
whether
to
you believe
clear of it overall.
Yeah.
I will tell you, here's an immediate take. It is a disgrace that Yankees fans booed Tim Anderson yesterday.
Yeah, it is. It is. We already talked about how classless they are. Remember when they were throwing stuff at the Indians, at the Guardians outfielders, right? I mean,
they're having a banner year up there.
An awful brand of human in New York. But the thing I did want to talk about as a one last thing was kind of related to we looked at free agency and we talked a lot about free agency on our own. I mean, obviously the show wasn't running in the off season, but there was a lot of big names in free agency this year. And if you look at it so far, I mean, you can't call anybody an overwhelming success or anybody an overwhelming failure. But all the big names that were out there in free agency, how many of them have really just been terrible or not good so far? I mean, we have one of them here in Schwarber's just not been up to snuff, right? But look around Major League Baseball: Marcus Semien, Javi Baez, Correa, Seeger, Trevor Story until this past weekend was terrible. Like, I mean, there have been so many big-name free agents that just have not been good.
I mean, could you imagine? Could you imagine getting Marcus Semien this offseason off a year where he hits 45 home runs, has 39 doubles? This guy has played 39 games this season, has 169 plate appearances. He hasn't homered yet.
Yeah.
He hasn't homered yet of a 45 home run year.
It's fascinating to me.
Insane.
It really is. And even Robbie Ray, I mean, he pitched well against the Phillies, but
that's about it.
I mean, that's it. He had one good start. Like, I mean, Chris Bryant's been injured, but I mean, he's not been, what you're looking at so far. I mean, I'd say of the guys who are making 9 figures. Well, Scherzer before he got hurt was great. I mean, he was pitching really well. And Freddie Freeman's Freddie Freeman, obviously. But who else? Kevin Gausman, I guess. I mean, that's a win for the Blue Jays. He's had a nice year so far. And then probably your next best guy is Castellanos.
Yeah.
Amongst the big money guys. I mean, seriously, all the big money players that signed this offseason.
Corey Seager's been fine. He's been fine. I think Corey Seager, if he's kind of just been a guy where you bring him in, you're like, all right, he hasn't been a disaster, but he hasn't been he hasn't changed or been a difference maker for the Rangers.
Yeah. They've just not been good.
Yeah, Robbie Ray in 4 starts this month has given up at least 4 earned runs in every single start except for the one against the Phillies. So.
Yeah.
Also, the only game this season in which he's recorded at least 10 strikeouts. So.
That's crazy.
So yeah.
Yeah. So it's funny. Like some of the more lower tier guys have been the better. When I say lower tier, I mean if I mention Carlos Rodon, I mean he's getting over $40 million, but he's certainly a second tier, right? Amongst free agents. Starling Marte was more of a second tier kind of free agent. Those kind of guys, they've had a much better impact, for their teams.
It's interesting, and you bringing up this conversation sort of draws back to a larger point. And we always look at the Phillies. It's hyper focused here. Obviously, we talk about the inconsistencies and the frustrations. Go across baseball right now, and you look at every team and where they're kind of sitting in the standings, and there's really only a handful of teams in the sport right now that you would say have almost been immune to that. And I know that early in the year, the Yankees kind of went through this like little offensive funk, and then they quickly broke out of that. But really, other than the Yankees, maybe to a lesser degree, the Rays, who are 24-17, the Twins are 9 games over 500, and the Astros have gotten off to a really hot start. The Angels have struggled a little bit lately, but still 9 games over. Those are the only teams in the AL that have sort of been immune from the, I want to rip my hair out watching this team. And then, certainly in the East, in the National League, the Mets are the only team that's been immune to that. And then the Brewers in the Central, and really the Dodgers and Padres in the West. Everybody else has kind of been like, there's 10 teams that have been playing pretty good baseball so far this year, and the other 20 have just sort of been exactly what the Phillies are. Some ups, some downs. It's been pretty frustrating.
Yeah, it's unique, and maybe it is the whole mushy ball thing, Bob. Maybe. I mean, maybe a lot of these teams thought they were going to be a lot better because and then the ball's just not flying, and it's like, okay. And maybe you have to wait and see the second half of the season. Does Major League Baseball change that? Do they go back to the more lively ball? Does that make a difference? Who knows? But yeah, it's been so far. I mean, the one last thing has been these guys who got all this big money. They haven't really impressed.
No, they have not. All right, well, for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. Thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Crossed Up. Make sure that you follow us on YouTube. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to not only listen, but to subscribe. And if you happen to be on Apple, it's been a while, we're back, and you can leave us a 5-star review. That would be much appreciated. So until next time, which will probably be on Thursday or Friday morning, I'm Bob Wankel for Anthony Sanfilippo. We will talk to you soon.